Hi everybody, my name is Nelson Everhart. Nice to meet you. I'm the composer of the Turok 3 Shadow of Oblivion soundtrack, which was released in the year 2000 by Acclaim Studios Austin, which was previously called Iguana Studios. A couple days ago at Gamescom, Nightdive Studios announced that they're going to be releasing Turok 3. They also announced that we had remastered the score. I got a call from them a while back asking if I'd be interested in remixing a track or two, and a track or two turned into pretty much the whole thing once we got going and having fun. So I thought we could take a look at one of the tracks from the remaster, and I could talk about my thought process into the challenges that bringing a 23-year-old game soundtrack back into something resembling a modern sound would go. Right around 1997 or 98, I worked in Austin, Texas at a studio that was then called Acclaim Studios Austin, but was once Iguana Studio, who developed Turok Dinosaur Hunter and Turok 2 Seeds of Evil. Both of those were composed by Darren Mitchell. Darren actually hired me when he got promoted to head of the department, and I got to write the score for Turok 3 Shadow of Oblivion. So the sound modules that I originally used were a Roland JV2080 and an Alesis DM Pro, and a handful of other like sampling CDs and even some custom recordings of some ethnic percussion instruments from a coworker's collection. I'll post a pic here of my studio at Acclaim. Aw, look at him. Isn't he cute? The first game I did when I got down to Austin was South Park Chef's Love Shack, but Turok 3 came really soon after that. The game was developed for the N64, which was cartridge-based, which means that the memory footprint was very modest, like 8 meg or something like that, and that was for the entire game. The game code, the art, the animation, the level, the sound effects, the music. We all had to share those 8 megabytes, which means that I had to make the music fit in as small a footprint as I possibly could. That meant there was not room for audio files as we would do today. So I used my Mac, I think it was a G4 back then, to compose the music, and I used what we would now call a DAW or a DAW called Studio Vision Pro. I wrote all the music and got it sounding good. Then I had to export all of the note data as MIDI files, and I had to record and edit the samples of the sounds that I was using from the JV2080 and the DM Pro and wherever else I was getting them. I had to create sample sets that would go inside the N64, and then the MIDI note information would play those sample sets. To get it sounding anywhere near acceptable was a lot of back and forth and iterating multiple times. The sound tools were PC based, so I had to copy files from the Mac to the PC, import them into the PC, compile the thing, listen to it, and then go, the attack on the strings is a little bit off. Go tweak that in the sound tools, listen to it again. These notes are coming in early. Go back to the Mac, rework the MIDI notes, slide the notes later, export the MIDI file, carry it over to the PC. I will link down below a YouTube video that kind of explains the rough process to give you an idea of kind of the tools that I was working with. Now, I don't think that the original recordings of the tracks that I made were ever released. I recorded it, in case there was a need for that in the future. The writing was kind of on the wall even at that time that we were going to move to just regular digital audio files, and at some point soon this process would go the way of the dinosaurs, if you'll pardon the saying. And in fact, I don't think I ever did this for any other game that we did. This is the one and only time I got to do it. So with such an involved process, when I was asked to remix them for the remaster of the game that Nightdive is doing, which will be released in November, it was kind of daunting because I had some of the source files on an archive that was, back in my collection somewhere, but there was a lot of stuff that I didn't really remember about the process, and I just wasn't sure how to go about the remixing. So I originally used a DAW called Opcode Studio Vision Pro. It's not made anymore, and it does not run on modern operating systems. So the programmer that I was working with at Nightdive, he actually installed a VM running OS 9, found an old copy of the software, opened up the files, and spit the files out into MIDI data for me, sent them to me. I was able to import them into Pro Tools, which is the data you see right here on my screen. So then came the job of remembering which tunes went where and what sounds I was originally using. I remembered some of them, but there's still some that I'm not sure exactly where they come from. The programmer was also able to rip the N64 sample sets that I used and send them to me and convert them into a sound font, which I was able to open and play. And I got to hear the sounds that I created originally. So you know, it was one of my first games. I was like 24 and it was, you know, first time I'm going through this process. Listening back to it, there was definitely stuff I would do differently, you know, had I ever had to do it again. Fortunately, the program was able to rip those 23-year-old sample sets created by an industry noob. Unfortunately, they sounded like 23-year-old sample sets created by an industry noob. Fortunately, I still have the hardware or modern virtual equivalents. So you're able to just dial up some of the old sounds that actually come from not just the JV2080, but the expansion cards that I had inserted into the 2080 with this SRS Orchestra virtual instrument. And then unfortunately, a few sounds I couldn't remember where they were. Trying to find a specific sound is kind of a tall order if you don't really remember where to start. So I did wind up using some of the sound font that Nightdive had sent to me. In listening back to this track, I had to figure out what I would do to it to actually make the sound better, and found no shortage of targets. So that brings us to this track. It was from the first level. The track was called Racing Toward Disaster. I'm sure if you are familiar with the game, you probably heard this loop several hundred times while running through and blasting a bunch of alien dinosaurs and zombies. I thought we could take a look at this track and just, I'll tell you what I did to kind of remaster it. We'll even take a listen to the original, which was captured from the N64 hardware. So this is the tune up here as it exists on the cartridge. So this is the sound font of all of these sounds that I created for the N64. So all of the sounds that are in the Turok soundtrack are right here. They get played by the MIDI data. So I was able to go through and listen to what the track sounded like with the original sounds. Then I decided which sounds needed to be replaced. And I was trying to keep the original intent. I was trying to make choices that I would have chosen back 23 years ago had I only had access to the technology that I have today. And I didn't change anything radically. I originally used like a horn sample from the JV2080, and I replaced them with another French horn sound that sounds very similar, but just sounds a lot more realistic. There was also times where I could use this. This is from the Rolling Cloud series, which is it's a subscription service, which I hate. But for this project, it was great because I could dial up the original sounds, the source of the sounds that I made for the N64 sample sets. It was weird pulling these sounds up. I'm like, oh my gosh, I had forgotten I always used this sound. Right? So I had the sound font of the original sounds. I had the recreation of the JV2080. I also have the JV2080 in my studio. I think I kept it around mostly for nostalgia, thinking that I might need it, but I haven't used it except to resurrect some of the older tracks that I've written. There's another game I did with Acclaim called Vex where I used a lot of the sounds in there, so I'd go back. So to upgrade these sounds, I wound up this is my modern environment, is this plugin called Contact. And inside Contact, I have all of the sounds that I use all the time. I replaced a lot of the string marcato sounds that were just, the attacks were too consistent, with some modern equivalents. This is from a library called Ellie Scoring Strings, their ensemble patches. And also the long strings were even more problematic than the Mercado stuff. So I replaced that with a Project Sam Symphobia library sound called Strings Ensemble Long Notes. The nice thing about this Long Notes patch is that you have access to all of these different articulations inside it. So it's one instrument, but you can actually emulate different articulations for the string, because string players have all kinds of different techniques that they could use. And just to vary it up a little bit, to offer a little bit of variety, there's a couple spots where I use the tremolo articulation instead of just the regular sustained, which would have been on the original soundtrack. So when you're working with a limited palette like we had here, you got to find different strategies and approaches to maximize the use of that to make the most interesting and varied stuff you can within this limited memory footprint. So what I did here was I had two of the same snare sound, but I panned one of them hard left, one of them hard right. And then without spending much more memory footprint here, I was able to get a lot of stereo field interest. So let's play a little bit of what the original track sounded like. kind of self-explanatory why I might want to replace some of those sounds. So what I'll do now is play the new track, and we can kind of A/B it from what you just heard. Here you go. This is called Racing Towards Disaster. It's one of the first tracks you hear in the game. That is where the track loops. Looping is also another area that the remix required me to do a little bit more work. When it's MIDI data, you can just tell the game engine to, okay, when it gets to this point, go back and play the MIDI data from the beginning of the track again and just keep looping like that. When it's audio, you have to actually put those markers in the wave file so that the engine can loop it for you. So I played for you already the marcato parts here. I found that I wanted a little bit more punch, so I did add a new cello spiccato patch here. It wouldn't work by itself, but I like layering it in with the previous. Gives a little bit more edge to those accented notes. And then here is the new long strings. Sounds really good. I did layer another violin sound on top of it, just for a little bit more definition there. And then this low sus strings track is the same. It's triggering the same sound as the high sustained strings. But for the N64 release, I had them on different channels. The old timpanis were pretty bad. It's not terrible, but it's definitely dated. So here are the new timpanis. When you hit it softly, it's got a really muffled, mellowy sound. So we actually get different attacks. That's the problem with original sample sets, is because they were from one dynamic recording. So it didn't really have those different dynamics in there. Now, having said that, I probably could have created instruments that played different samples based on the velocity that you struck it with, but not entirely sure that the tools supported that. You know, next time I develop a soundtrack for the N64, I'll keep that in mind. All right, now here, these are actually being triggered. These are triggering the actual N64 sample set that I made. So that's the cymbal roll. I actually mapped a few different instruments, especially percussion sounds where they're kind of one hit. Like, you know, this is the cymbal roll. That's the only note I'm going to ever play that on. So I have some room to put some other percussion instruments together on one patch, which just makes it a little bit easier. So this hit, this little slam there is another part of that. It's what triggers when you press this guy. And then these are all the low. It's called a Gronka. It's a patch from the 2080. So all three of those sounds are on this one patch. And then this is the Tam Tam, and this is from the JV2080, but I wound up using the. So this again is part of the Roland cloud service. There's the Tam Tam and hit a key. And I chose this sound specifically because you can play it low and have it sound very, very almost like a temple bell, you know, like a really just low, huge thing. if you play it up higher, you get just a variety of tones, bigger and smaller. So it makes sense to choose some of these sounds that are more flexible because you can use them in more tracks. I think there's going to be a classic mode for the soundtracks too. So if you want to play the game with the original crappy sounds, you know, that's fine. Who am I to tell you can't do that? No, go with my blessing. I understand people, you know, for the nostalgia factor, it's probably a really interesting thing to do. Just do me a favor. Give me a chance to impress you with the new stuff, knowing that it's coming from the same soul that created the original soundtrack. Here is the snares on the left. And now let's play that same thing with the right snare added in. And I recorded those as separate passes. I'm playing the same part, but the tiny little micro differences between each part. So it's called doubling. And it just gives kind of a wider, fatter sound. About halfway through the tune, a little shaker comes in to kind of give you a little, like the watch countdown until the bomb blows up, right? Just a little ticking trying to come in behind you and up the danger. Here's the original. Huh, what do you know? So I don't know if it didn't sound good in the N64 version of it, but apparently I did not have the shaker in the original. So if you think about it, the new remix tracks are actually the true form of the tune. All right, now we get to these clusters and scrapes. To be honest, I don't know where I got these sounds. In addition to the hardware modules, I also used some sampling CDs for certain sounds. That makes it hard to identify some of the sounds because I'm not sure where they came from. Oh yeah, this is YouTube. If you guys know where that sound comes from, please let me know in the comments and I will be forever grateful. That's the cluster. And that's the, it's like a cymbal scrape. You scrape a stick or a mallet or something across a gong and probably get that sound. Yeah, so that's the track from the upcoming Nightdive Studios remaster of Turok 3 Shadow of Oblivion. This is going to be coming out in November 2023, so you can get your cerebral bore action on and play as Danielle or Joseph. I also happen to have a little bit of inside information that there's going to be some surprises and some new additional Easter eggs for everybody to reward the fans who have waited so long for a re-release on modern systems. So thanks, guys. I've got some other stuff on my channel. Go check that out.
Leave a like, hit the smash the like button, all crap.
And I'll catch you later.